Greetings everyone, welcome back to a video that for the first time in a long time has made me feel like I need a script for it. I just have been having so much trouble articulating with the words that properly describe what I'm trying to say with the idea of this video, and this is like my third time trying to record it, but screw it, third time's the charm they say, let's keep going. Today I want to talk about the exception and not the rule. Now I've kind of alluded to this in previous videos that I've done, especially on the Balisongs impulse, about how China is creating Balisongs at a level that other companies can't really compete with. And I want to expand on that in this video, because while I think that that is a great thing, I want to make the argument that we can't let this stifle the innovation and the ability of other makers to compete, because the reality is a lot of them can't. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you need to agree with everything I'm saying in this video. I'm simply presenting how I sort of see Chinese manufacturing's place in the Balisong hobby right now, and making the argument to maybe convince some other people to be a little bit less harsh on some other companies when comparing them to something that, say, Balisongs is creating. Less so LDY over here, but we'll get into why I think that in a little bit. So what's the issue then? I want to make it very, very clear. I am not telling you to drop all criticism of, let's say, an American-made company in this video, and I'm also not telling you to start criticizing a Chinese company in this video. I'm not trying to say that one is bad and one is good. I'm simply just trying to say that we need to keep in mind that Chinese Balisongs fill a dramatically different role than most other Balisongs, that they can't really be compared and they can't really be seen as competing with each other. Does that make sense? Or at least I don't see them as competing with each other. So for the duration of this video, I'm going to use Balisongs as an example of a Chinese manufacturer, because they're really one of the only companies right now that's producing stuff that is so difficult to compete with. And then I'm going to use Squid as a local example, a company that makes Balisongs in my country. You can fill it in with whatever Balisong company is in your country, whether it's Canada with BB Barfly, or whatever the case may be. My hope is that the release of the Impulse, being one of the first genuine, like, normal construction Balisongs for $40, does not cause people to look at other makers, like Squid, and say, ew, you guys are disgustingly overpriced. Why does the Squiddy Ale not have bushings when it's double the price of the Balisongs Impulse? That's stupid. You guys need to do better. Again, I'm not saying that you can't judge Squid for their price to performance ratio, because I agree. In the past, Squid has not had the most competitive price to performance. Even to this day, stuff like the Mako not having bushings is a pain point within the community that people really wish wasn't a pain point in the community. I'm just saying to be a little bit more fair in the fact that those two companies are competing and creating Balisongs under wildly different circumstances that don't really allow competition at this level to exist. And what do I mean by that? The Impulse is so cheap that most people that I've talked to physically can't comprehend how Balisongs got it that cheap. And I would be willing to hazard a guess and put a bet out there that even Balisongs can't go much cheaper than this. But ultimately, the difference is Squid is a company, and again, fill this in for any company that is local to you, doesn't have access to the incredible amount of manufacturing that China does. China has become a massive, massive power in terms of cheap manufacturing that they can send all over the world. It's the reason why websites like AliExpress and Temu are filled with sometimes items that cost cents on the dollar that you can just buy, and they're kind of just cheaper versions of whatever you may be trying to replace. Kind of like clones in some ways. It's just that Nabali's is one of the first companies that isn't a clone company and is putting a lot of that savings from Chinese manufacturing into actually researching and developing original designs, which it can then sell for a little bit more than some clone companies. I know there's clones out there that have gotten as low as like $20, $30. But Nabali's is an original design. I want to give them credit for that. The problem comes when like I said, you look at two companies like Nabali's and like Squid, and you say, Squid, you're way too overpriced because Nabali's created something for half the price that has bushings, and the Squiddy AL is double the price and it doesn't have bushings. All I'm trying to say is that that's just not entirely fair. And the reason that's not entirely fair is, again, because of that cheap manufacturing that China has access to. The reality is that in order for Squid to run a business, they're located in California, in case you didn't know, so they need to not only pay Californian taxes, they need to pay for a building in California, they also need to pay their workers a wage that they can live off of in California, one of the most notoriously expensive states to live in the United States. Nabali's doesn't have to do any of that. We don't know what their operation looks like on the other side, but the reality is that they are not subject to the same taxes, the same import fees, the same costs, the same overhead, the same anything that Squid is. So it is physically impossible for Squid to even close to match the quality of what is coming out of these really cheap Balisongs from China. And I think it is really important to look at them in your head as almost two completely different things. The Impulse serves an invaluable position as something that can be cheaply purchased, where you're supporting a company that actually cares about the Balisong community, creates original designs, and has an upgrade path. They provide an amazing service to people just getting into the hobby. And I'm not saying that you should boycott them or stop buying from them whatsoever. I think these are incredibly important to the growth of the hobby. We just simply can't look at these two as fundamentally competing with each other. Now we can. You can compare the Squiddy AL all the live long day to the Nabali's Impulse. But what isn't so fair is to say that Squid, in order to not be overpriced, needs to match the value of the Impulse. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense, because it's like running a race where you have to create your own car, and Nabali's has access to tools that no other team has to create the best car. Now, does Nabali's win that race? Absolutely, every time. But it's also worth recognizing the other people who also did pretty well in that race, because they were working with much more limited tools. Now, maybe that's not the most perfect analogy in the world, but it's kind of the way that I see all of this. And it especially starts to hurt smaller makers that are just them, like Zippy. I think Zippy is probably subject to a lot of people looking at his stuff and going, that's way too overpriced. You should be more like Nabali's and make something like the Impulse, when it's just physically not possible for Zippy to do that. Zippy is a guy in his house designing things that are one of a kind in the community, which kind of brings me on to my next argument as to why I don't think it's going to be a massive deal. Like, I don't think American or Canadian or whatever companies are inherently just going to die out because Nabali's created the Impulse. And that's because Zippy and all these other makers provide something that Nabali's doesn't. Machine-wise, provides a quality that I haven't felt in any Chinese Balisong I've felt. Even something as expensive as the Vixen doesn't really get up to the heights of that machine-wise fit and finish. Zippy has some of the most unique engineering in the entire hobby. These toolless spacers are still some of the coolest things that I have seen on a Balisong. Squid provides, for an American-made company, a massive, massive amount of stock compared to some other companies that are only doing, monthly drops, it feels like. And they also have a huge product variety, meaning that you can get an American-made Balisong that fits your needs at almost any price, which is insane. So I don't think, like I said, they're necessarily dead in the water. They still provide things that are invaluable and that people care about. I just think it is necessary to recognize, in terms of Balisong value, price to performance, performance per dollar, that these Chinese-made Balisongs that are coming out are the exception and not the rule. They are a one-of-a-kind anomaly that can't be replicated anywhere else in the hobby except by other Chinese makers. Now, I mentioned earlier that LDY doesn't totally fall victim to that, and I think that's just because LDY doesn't have a Balisong that is impossibly cheap yet, especially on their trend of more of their recent Balisongs being more expensive, like the Kite or like the Orion. The Orion S being over $100. The Kite is kind of impossibly cheap, but it's not so cheap that it puts everyone else to shame. Like, there's still things that compete with the Kite at the $220 price point that it's at, whereas there is literally nothing that competes with the Impulse at its own price, except like the Canyon or other stuff from Nibali's. So that's basically it. They are the exception, not the rule. That's at least how I see it. That's how I'm going to continue to see it going forward. You're not going to see me look at, the Squiddy, like I keep using this example, but you're not going to see me in videos, at least I hope not to do this. You're not going to see me look at the Squiddy Owl and go, this thing's a piece of shit because the Impulse is half the price. Video over. So I want to try and kind of lead myself away from that. There are still obviously good things, like I said, to learn from comparing two Balisongs, but specifically the performance per dollar one. The exception, not the rule. The anomaly, the one-of-a-kind thing, not the overwhelming majority of what everyone else is able to create. Hopefully I worded that well. Hopefully this video was somewhat understandable and I didn't just ramble on and talk in circles for 10 minutes. Thank you all for watching. And I am going to go get a drink because my mouth is so dry trying to explain this stuff so many different times. See you later.